So just before we get into the panel discussion, I'd like to just briefly introduce the three folks that haven't had a chance to speak yet. Joining Bob and Mitch on the panel, we have Jay Martin from CHIP. We have Jeff Julien, who's a managing director at JLL, focusing on multifamily. And we have Joe Fingerman, who's a managing director and senior vice president at Signature Bank. So, Bob, please.
Okay, thanks, Hags. Mitch, that was a great overview, and as you can see, it's not all bad news with respect to the new rent reforms. There are still a lot of ways to extract upside potential out of your buildings by being creative and by figuring out how to utilize the guidelines and the regulations to benefit your assets. However, there have been a number of unintended consequences that have come about because of the regulations, and I want the panelists to talk about these. Some of them are that we've heard stories about owners who simply are not going to rent rent-stabilized units that become available. They are going to warehouse them. There are fewer renovations that are going on. Owners that would routinely ask an owner, a tenant, if they wanted an upgraded kitchen or bathroom for a slight increase in rent where their rent would still be well below market. Those offers are not being made anymore, and those renovations won't be made. There is no incentive today for an owner to bring litigation to stop illegal sublets. Absolutely no reason to do that. No reason to stop a tenant from turning their unit into an Airbnb unit. And that will lead to actually a lower volume, a lower supply of available units, which will exert upward pressure on the rents being paid by fair market tenants. So there are a number of unintended consequences of the law. And based upon what we've heard today, Joe, I'm going to start with you. I'd like to ask you, based on what we've heard, is Signature Bank still open for business, and are you still making multifamily loans today?
We were so up with Mitch's speech, but now you just took us right back down. But to answer your question, and there's a lot of bankers I see in the room, and I think a lot of us have spoken and sort of been taking the Alka-Seltzer and Rolaids together for the last couple months. Signature is open for business. We are looking at multifamily loans. Certainly, we are looking at the new regulations accordingly, which are dictating some terms. Like most, Metro New York banks, we're very sponsor-driven. We are, most of the time, for the last 10 years, we haven't been lending on projections. So when you lend on in-place income, there's less of a issue in the future. It all comes down to our basis that we're in on the building, what the sponsorship looks like, location, unit types, et cetera. Unfortunately, as I don't need to tell you and your colleagues, the sales market's very slow. So that is slowing down a lot of production, and a lot of refinancings have happened in the last 2 or 3 years. So people aren't doing much, and as such, it does appear the banks are slow. But for the owners out there, we do want to lend to you. We want to work with you. It might not be what it was 3 or 4 years ago, but we are open for business and hoping to continue.
And Joe, how do you anticipate, it's probably too soon to know, but are bank regulators going to look at your portfolio and say, hey, Joe, we thought you had a 52% LTV and it's really more like 82 now because of new value resets? Are you anticipating any interaction with regulators in that regard?
Well, all of the institutions, we're close to 50 billion, have regulators that don't just show up, they work at our bank every day. But we're hopeful, and initial guidance is during the 2008-2009 correction, we worried about debt service coverages, which right now, from what we're seeing, are going up because owners aren't spending as much money as they were on different expenses. I think it would be a huge mistake right now to revalue the entire portfolio. I have appraisers, sales brokers almost every day calling me what cap rates are, should we use, what's the market like? I don't think we have answers yet, and I think, as you mentioned, it's going to take some time to weed out. The first 10 sales will probably have asterisks next to them. That was signed beforehand. That was signed because it's distressed, et cetera. But we're hopeful that the regulators will work with us. Ultimately, they can cause a downturn for the banks if they make us revalue everything based on some, hypothesis that they read.
Got it. Jeff, institutional capital, with all that's going on in the multifamily sector, what are you seeing from REITs, pension funds? How are they interpreting the changes to the marketplace?
Sure. So it's a good question. I would say, as we all know, the multifamily market in New York is very complex, and there's many different pieces to the multifamily market. I would say you've got to break it down into the different types of buildings. What we've found is each building is different. Each building is its own little ecosystem, depending on what percentage you have stabilized, what percentage is free market, is there a tax abatement, et cetera. So it really varies building to building. I think to answer your question, we are seeing, I think in general, the institutional capital is digesting the new regulations and is in a wait and see mode over the next several months to 6 to 12 months to digest what's happening. However, in our business, we sell a lot of 421A buildings and a lot of fair market buildings, and we're actually seeing almost more interest in those types of buildings in this new regime and the new regulations. So while the institutional capital is being cautious, we're seeing owner-operators and we're seeing family office capital actually being somewhat more aggressive on these particular, whether it's 421A or whether it's a fair market building. So we think there's going to be opportunities there. I do, and even in the institutional capital space, there's nuances where we are seeing some institutional capital that is underallocated in the city and would like to come in and invest. And is it going to be in a heavily rent-regulated building in the boroughs? Probably not. I think that part of the market is going to be in a standstill for a while. But I think in certain areas, yes, you'll see the institutional capital there.
Okay, and Jeff, with regard to the appetite that capital has, if rent-regulated buildings are not the target of that capital, but yet the capital exists and wants to stay in real estate, do you think that geographic diversity might take over? What are you hearing from the folks that you're dealing with each day? Is it maybe buying a different type of asset in New York, or is it expanding geographically to get that diversification in the portfolio?
Yeah, and I think there is an interest and an appetite to buy rent-regulated product from the institutional capital. I think there hadn't been any trades. No one knows where it's going to price. No one knows what the cap rates are, as we discussed earlier, right? So I think you will see, and we've seen this over the past few years, where there's been a ramp up of interest in workforce housing and social impact investing, and we see a lot of our big institutional clients going into that space. So I do think eventually you will see the capital going back into rent stabilized product once pricing is reset and once everyone's comfortable. I think it's just going to, right now we're in a moment in time where everyone is trying to figure it out, but I do think they will come back in.
Great. Jay, how are you down there?
Good morning.
I have to tell you, I love CHIP. I remember back in the early 90s, I became actively involved, and I felt like it was graduate school for a real estate broker to learn everything about rent regulation and the multifamily market in the city. So congrats on your post there.
Thank you.
Not to point fingers or anything, but in retrospect, given the way everything unfolded with rent regulation, do you think that the industry generally could have done things a little bit differently to help impact the outcome of what occurred in June?
Right. Well, it's a cliche to say hindsight is 20/20, right? But and I've said this several times in several panels that I've been on so far since the rent, actually before and after. But I think it's important to remember that the seeds for what happened in June were actually sowed in 2016 with the election of Donald Trump as president. And I'm not going to go into a conversation about whether or not you agree with the current president's policies or not, but what the president was able to do is engage a political environment and an electorate in New York City specifically that was not engaged prior to 2016. Similarly to how the President Obama's election in 2008, 2009 created a kind of a Tea Party movement on the conservative side. Similarly, in the election of the president on the 2016 level, and again, by all means, this isn't the only blame, but a huge catalyst for the motivation for what happened in June started actually back in that election. And so what happened is you have this overly charged up political electorate on one side of the political ideology It comes in and has successful primary elections within the state government. The makeup of the state government itself changes drastically. For the first time consistently in over 70 years, the Republican-controlled state Senate becomes Democrat, and not just Democrat, but a supermajority Democrat with 10 votes. So then you, as an industry, as we approach lobbying on behalf of our interests, you're already greatly reduced in your influence, because you can peel off 2 votes, you can peel off 4 votes, you can even peel off 6 or 7 votes. But to peel off 10 votes to kill a bill or to at least force negotiation is nearly impossible when the political environment is what it is. So I'll be trying to be more succinct. Bottom line is, we were lobbying aggressively leading up those weeks and months leading up to this bill. The fix was in long before those weeks and months. And it was clear that once the governor took a position of non-negotiation, basically saying that I'll sign, in the last few days, I'll sign whatever bill the legislature sends to me, our ability to hold those no votes that we had secured leading up to that dissolved overnight, rapidly. So when you have now essentially 3 branches of government who are acquiescing in their ability to stand up for building owners, which is what happened, you're put in a position where there's little leverage. And in the industry as a whole, we've been able to function politically and our ability to fight bad legislation before with financial resources. The problem, or the other side might say the benefit, is that the financial resources are becoming less of a factor. Elected officials are turning down donations from real estate. They're making it a badge of honor, and elections are being won 3-1 and sometimes 8-1 when they're being outspent by their opponents. So the money factor is almost becoming a non-issue when you have a motivated electorate that's willing to go out and vote, regardless of how many commercials or how many pieces of mail or how much money the other side is willing to spend. So to answer your question, could we have done anything differently? The answer is no. I don't think we could have rapidly changed the game over the last 2 years. I think as going forward, there are some key steps we need to do to change how we approach our political lobbying, our political interactions with not only elected officials, but our tenants themselves, and overall how we approach lobbying and legislation.
And Jay, are those things that you can share or choose not to share?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll tell anyone who will listen. Actually, and it's in our organization. Some of you may know we represent 4,000 building owners. 90% of those are rent stabilized. So we were intricately impacted by these 2019 laws. So the bottom line is, going forward, we have to work with our tenants more than the other side is going to work with them. And some of this may seem simple, but we have to have, we're encouraging all of our members to have social media presences on Twitter and what have you. We're working with members to have town hall meetings with their tenant organizations, tenants that they know are in place. We represent close to 400,000 units. We're talking nearly 1 million tenants. If we can't find 100 that are happy in their buildings and we can't explain to them that these laws are actually going to make their housing less affordable, less safe, less well-maintained, then we should all just go home now. But I think we can do that, and I think that's what the other side has been doing for decades. And we have the resources and the intelligence to be able to talk to our tenants in a way that explains to them that we're not at war with our tenants. We are in a system, we are locked in together, a rent-stabilized system, that we as building owners want to be able to make a profit, yes, but also provide safe, affordable housing. And that key to that is that there's an interaction that isn't adversarial between tenants and building owners. So that's one step. There are other steps we can be more politically aggressive, although, again, difficult, finding candidates to help change the makeup of the legislature. And a third step would be what our organization, in teaming up with the RSA, has decided to do, and then it's filed in federal court, because we believe that the 2019 laws put a cherry on top of a system that was already not working for rent-stabilized tenants or building owners. It was icing out the building of more units, which is counter to the whole point of the system itself. And we intend to aggressively pursue it in court as well. So those three different avenues, kind of more political organizing, using the same tactics that the other side uses against us to our own advantage, fighting this law and others in court, and making sure that we're much more smart on how we spend our resources politically are three things that we must consider doing as an industry.